It's the most powerful technology of our time. But how does artificial intelligence actually work? We're pulling back the curtain. This is AI Deconstructed.
Imagine standing in a gallery, looking at a portrait. The brushstrokes are confident, the play of light on the subject's face is impossibly realistic, and the expression in their eyes feels real. But the artist doesn't exist. The subject never lived. The entire image was dreamed up, pixel by pixel, by a machine. This isn't science fiction anymore, it's the world of generative AI. Before we can understand how an AI learns to create, we first need to appreciate a fundamental fork in the road in the world of machine learning. It's a distinction that boils down to a simple question. What is the difference between recognizing a cat and drawing a cat? For years, the vast majority of AI you and I interacted with, whether we knew it or not, was focused on recognition. This is the domain of discriminative AI. Think of a spam filter in your email. Its job is to look at an incoming message and make a judgment. Spam or not spam, it learns to draw a line, a decision boundary in the data space to separate one category from another. It doesn't need to know how to write a convincing email, either real or spam. It only needs to identify the telltale patterns that distinguish them. This is where our first key analogy comes in. The art critic versus the artist. A discriminative model is the art critic. The critic can spend a lifetime studying art and become an expert at telling a Monet from a Picasso. They can identify the characteristic brushstrokes, the color palettes, the subject matter. They learn the boundary between the two artists' styles. But ask them to paint a brand new Monet, and they'd be lost. They have the knowledge to classify, but not to create. Generative AI, on the other hand, is the artist. To paint a new Monet, the artist can't just know what isn't a Monet. They must have a deep, intuitive understanding of what a Monet is. They have to learn the underlying essence, the statistical soul of the data, what we call the data's distribution. They need to understand the relationship between a water lily and a certain shade of blue, the way light reflects off a pond, the very texture of the canvas. They have to model the whole world of Monet's art, not just the line separating it from everything else. This difference is reflected in the mathematics that power these models. A discriminative model, our critic, learns what's called a conditional probability. You can read this as, quote, "What is the probability of a label Y, like Monet, given that I am looking at this specific data, X, the painting," end quote. It's a direct, focused question. A generative model, our artist, tackles a much harder task. It learns the joint probability. This asks, quote, "What is the probability of this data X and this label Y existing together in the world?" End quote. To answer this, the model has to understand not just the label, but the data itself. It has to learn how likely any given painting is to even exist in the first place. This leads to a crucial asymmetry. A generative model, because it learns this deeper joint distribution, can actually perform the critic's job. By applying a mathematical tool called Bayes' rule, it can derive the conditional probability, that probability of Y given X, from its knowledge of the joint probability of X and Y, and act as a classifier. But the reverse is not true. The critic can never become the artist. The discriminative model's knowledge is a one-way street. It cannot generate new data. This reveals a core trade-off in AI. For a pure classification task, a specialized discriminative model is often more efficient and can even outperform a generative one, because it isn't burdened with modeling the entire universe of data. But that efficiency comes at the cost of capability. The generative model, while more complex, can do so much more. It can create. So, how do you teach a machine to be an artist? In 2014, a researcher named Ian Goodfellow reportedly after a discussion with colleagues at a bar, came up with an idea so elegant and powerful, it would ignite the field of generative AI. The idea wasn't to build one master artist network. It was to build two networks and pit them against each other in a high-stakes game of deception. This is the story of the Generative Adversarial Network, or GAN. The most intuitive way to understand a GAN is through the analogy of an art forger and an art detective. Our first character is the generator. This is our forger. The generator's goal is to create paintings, or in our case, images, that are so convincing they can pass as authentic masterpieces. But it starts from nothing. Its canvas is a vector of pure random numbers, what we call latent noise. It's like giving an artist a handful of static and telling them to turn it into a portrait of a dog. Initially, its creations are laughably bad, just meaningless smudges of color. Our second character is the discriminator. This is our Sharpie detective. The discriminator is a classic discriminative model, an art critic. Its job is simple and singular: to look at an image and determine if it's a genuine piece from the training dataset of real art or a forgery created by the generator. It outputs a probability, a number between 0 for definitely fake and 1 for definitely real. Now the game begins. It's what's known as a zero-sum game, where one's gain is the other's loss. The training process unfolds in an alternating dance. First, the detective goes to school. It's shown a batch of images containing both real masterpieces from our museum, the training data, and the forger's latest clumsy attempts. It learns, adjusting its internal parameters through backpropagation, to get better at telling the difference. Its goal is to correctly label the real as real and the fake as fake. Then it's the forger's turn. The generator creates a new batch of forgeries and shows them to the detective. The detective gives its verdict. Let's say it confidently declares an image is fake, giving it a score of 0.1. This verdict is the crucial feedback. This low score creates a large error signal that flows backward through the generator network. The forger uses this signal to minutely adjust its own process. It learns, quote, "Whatever I just did, it didn't work. The detective saw right through it. Next time, I need to make something more like this to fool it," end quote. The generator's sole objective is to maximize the probability of the discriminator making a mistake. This cycle repeats thousands, even millions of times. The detective gets better, forcing the forger to improve. The forger gets better, challenging the detective to find new, more subtle flaws. They are trained in alternation, each against a static version of their adversary, to keep the game stable. Eventually, if all goes well, a beautiful equilibrium is reached. The forger, the generator, becomes so adept that its creations are statistically indistinguishable from the real thing. The detective, the discriminator, is reduced to pure guesswork, its accuracy hovering around 50%. At this point, the game is over. The forger has won. We can now discard the detective and use our master forger, the trained generator, to produce an endless stream of novel, highly realistic images from simple random noise. This adversarial process is what allows GANs to produce such stunningly sharp and realistic images. Unlike other models that might be trained to minimize a fixed mathematical error, like the average pixel difference between two images, a GAN's generator is optimized against something far more sophisticated, a learned adaptive measure of realism. The discriminator is the loss function. It doesn't tell the generator its image is wrong because its pixels have an average error of 15.6. It tells the generator its image is wrong because it just doesn't look real. As the generator improves, the discriminator's definition of real becomes more and more nuanced. This process discovers the complex, hard-to-define criteria for photorealism, rather than having it prescribed by a simple equation. But this elegant dance has a dark side. GANs are notoriously difficult to train. The balance between the forger and the detective is incredibly delicate. If the detective becomes too good, too quickly, the forger gets no useful feedback. It's like a student whose teacher only ever says wrong without any explanation. This is the problem of vanishing gradients. Even more common is a problem called mode collapse. Imagine our forger discovers that painting a particular kind of cat face consistently fools the detective. It might then get lazy and produce only that one cat face, or minor variations of it, over and over. It has found a single mode in the data and collapsed onto it, failing to capture the full diversity of the real world. It's like an artist who becomes a one-trick pony, endlessly repeating their single hit. This failure to learn the complete data distribution is the GANs' Achilles heel. While GANs were learning to create through conflict, another family of models was taking a completely different approach. This approach wasn't about adversaries and deception, but about structure, probability, and careful reconstruction. This is the world of the Variational Autoencoder, or VAE. If a GAN is a forger and a detective, a VAE is more like a meticulous librarian trying to create the perfect, most efficient atlas of a vast library of books. Or, to use another great analogy, it's like a master chef who tastes a complex dish and tries to reverse engineer the fundamental recipe that created it. The basic architecture of a VAE consists of two parts, an encoder and a decoder. The encoder's job is to take a piece of high-dimensional data, like an image with millions of pixels, and compress it down into a small, dense representation of its most essential features. This compressed representation lives in a lower dimensional space we call the latent space. Think of it as reading a 500-page novel and writing a one-page summary that captures the core plot, themes, and character arcs. All the flowery language is gone, but the essence remains. The decoder's job is to do the exact opposite. It takes that one-page summary from the latent space and attempts to reconstruct the original 500-page novel, filling in all the details as best it can. Now, this encoder-decoder structure isn't unique to VAEs, but the VAE introduces a masterstroke, a truly brilliant twist. Its latent space is probabilistic. A standard autoencoder would map an image of a specific cat to a single precise coordinate in the latent space. A VAE, however, maps that cat not to a single point, but to a fuzzy region, a probability distribution, typically a Gaussian or bell curve, defined by a mean and a variance. Instead of having one exact address for cat on its map, the VAE creates a whole neighborhood called catness. Sampling a point from the very center of this region might give the decoder the recipe for a generic average cat, but sampling a point from the edge of the region might produce a cat that's a bit fluffier or has slightly different markings. This probabilistic approach forces the latent space to become smooth and continuous. The catness region gently blends into the dogness region. This means you can pick a point in the cat area, slowly move it across the map towards the dog area, and watch the decoder generate a seamless frame-by-frame morph from a cat into a dog. This is something a basic GAN struggles with. But this clever idea introduces a huge technical problem. The training process for neural networks, backpropagation, requires a clear deterministic path from the network's output all the way back to its inputs, so it can calculate how to adjust its weights. But a VAE has a random sampling step right in the middle of it. How can you calculate a precise gradient through an act of randomness? The solution is an ingenious piece of mathematical footwork called the reparameterization trick. It's a way of reframing the problem to sneak past the randomness. Instead of having the encoder network produce the random sample directly, we separate the randomness from the network's parameters. The encoder outputs the two parameters of the distribution. The mean, let's call it mu, and the standard deviation, sigma. Then we take a random number epsilon from a simple, fixed, standard normal distribution, one with a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. The final latent vector, z, is then calculated with a simple, deterministic formula. Z equals mu plus sigma times epsilon. Think of it this way. The network is no longer rolling the dice itself. It's just deciding the bias mu and the weight sigma of the dice. The random roll, epsilon, is an external, uncontrollable input. Because the path from mu and sigma to the final output is now fully deterministic, the gradients can flow through, and the network can learn. It's a beautiful hack that makes the entire VAE framework trainable. This structured approach gives the VAE a unique power. The latent space it learns isn't just a jumble of compressed data. It's a kind of generative grammar. The VAE's loss function has two parts. One that pushes the decoder to reconstruct the input accurately, and another, called the KL divergence, that pushes the encoder to organize all those fuzzy probability distributions into a neat, well-behaved continuous map. This organized atlas is a learned semantic model of the data's underlying factors of variation. For a data set of faces, one axis of the map might learn to control the degree of a smile, while another controls the angle of the head. This means VAEs are exceptionally powerful for tasks that require not just generating new things, but understanding and manipulating the structure of data. This is why they excel in scientific applications like anomaly detection, where an anomaly is simply a data point that maps to a desolate, empty region of the atlas, or in medicine, for modeling disease progression and even generating novel drug molecules. While a GAN's latent space is often a tangled, uninterpretable mess, the VAEs is a carefully organized library, a true map of imagination. So we have our two old masters, our two foundational schools of thought in generative art. Let's imagine visiting their studios to directly compare their philosophies, their processes, and the kind of work they produce. First, let's talk about image quality. This is where the difference is most striking. The GAN studio is like that of a photorealist painter. The works are incredibly sharp, crisp, and detailed, often indistinguishable from reality. As we discussed, its adversarial process, driven by a learned critic, optimizes for pure plausibility. The VAE studio, by contrast, feels more like an impressionist's workshop. The images are recognizable and often beautiful, but they have a characteristic softness, a dreamlike quality that can sometimes read as blurriness. Now we can understand why. The VAE's reconstruction loss function, typically a simple mean-squared error, incentivizes the decoder to produce the average of all plausible images that could correspond to a point in the latent space, and the mathematical average of many sharp, slightly different faces is one blurry face. It's hedging its bets to minimize pixel-wise error, whereas the GAN is going Allen on fooling the critic. Next, let's look at the training process. The GAN is a temperamental genius. When the conditions are just right, it produces masterpieces. But the process is fraught with peril. The adversarial balance is fragile, and the training is notoriously unstable and difficult to manage, often collapsing into failure. The VAE, on the other hand, is the reliable craftsperson. Its training process is stable, straightforward, and almost always converges to a sensible result. It's a standard optimization problem with a well-defined objective, not a delicate, high-stakes game. Finally, What about creative control? This is where the VAE truly shines. Its structured continuous latent space, its dreamer's atlas, is its superpower. It allows for elegant interpolation between concepts, like morphing a summer scene into a winter one, and meaningful manipulation of attributes. The latent space of a basic GAN is often an unstructured black box, while later, more advanced GAN variants like Style GAN would introduce incredible levels of control. The foundational GAN architecture offers little in the way of an interpretable creative canvas. Today, we've deconstructed two foundational philosophies of machine creation. In one corner, the Generative Adversarial Network, a brilliant competitive system that learns to replicate reality through a duel between a forger and a detective. It gives us unparalleled realism at the cost of stability. In the other corner, the Variational Autoencoder, a probabilistic, structured model that learns to create by building a comprehensive map of the data's essence. It offers stability and control, but often at the expense of sharpness. These are the old masters of generative AI, and while the models dominating today's headlines are newer and in many ways more powerful, their DNA can be traced directly back to the core ideas pioneered by GANs and VAEs. The concept of an adaptive learned loss function from GANs and the importance of a structured latent space from VAEs are principles that echo throughout the field. They established the fundamental paradigms that made everything else possible, setting the stage for the next great leap. Models that don't just copy reality, but learn the very language of creation itself.
You've been listening to AI Deconstructed. Join us next time as we unpack another layer of the technology shaping our future. Until then, stay curious. Subscribe for more.